The people of Ashcroft Estate repeated the same warning for years: never enter the Duke's forbidden garden. Some claimed it was cursed. Others whispered that anyone who crossed its gates would never return the same. Because of those stories, no one dared step inside. Elena, however, had never allowed fear to decide her future. After losing both her parents, she earned a living tending flowers for nearby villages. She believed every abandoned place deserved care, just as every wounded heart deserved compassion. One rainy morning, while delivering fresh roses to the estate, a powerful gust of wind carried her mother's old silver scarf over the towering iron fence. The scarf landed among blooming white lilies inside the forbidden garden. The servants begged her to forget it. "It's only a scarf," one whispered. "Nothing is worth entering that place." But to Elena, it was the last gift from her mother. Gathering her courage, she quietly opened the rusted gate. Instead of darkness, she found breathtaking flowers unlike anything she had ever seen. The air smelled of roses after rain, and colorful butterflies danced between ancient trees. Before she could retrieve the scarf, a calm voice echoed behind her. "So," the stranger said, "someone finally ignored the warning." Elena slowly turned. Standing beside a marble fountain was the mysterious Duke himself, watching her with thoughtful eyes instead of anger. Elena stood motionless as the Duke watched her from across the marble fountain. The gentle sound of falling water filled the silence between them, while drops of rain clung to the white roses surrounding the courtyard. She had expected anger. Instead, the Duke looked curious. "You are either very brave," he said calmly, "or very determined." Elena lowered her eyes respectfully. "I wasn't trying to break your rules. Your Grace." His expression remained unreadable. "Then why ignore every warning?" She carefully picked up the silver scarf that had fallen among the lilies. "This belonged to my mother." Her fingers tightened around the faded fabric. "It is the only thing I have left of her." For the first time, something softened in the Duke's face. He nodded slowly. "Then, perhaps you had a reason worthy of crossing the gate." The servants waiting outside looked completely stunned. No one had entered the forbidden garden in nearly 15 years. No one had spoken with the Duke inside. And certainly no one had walked away, unharmed. The Duke introduced himself simply as Adrian, although everyone in the kingdom knew him as the powerful Duke of Ashcroft. He spoke without arrogance. "I dislike titles inside this garden," he said. "Here, I am only its caretaker." Elena looked around in surprise. The place was breathtaking. Ancient oak trees shaded winding stone paths. Thousands of flowers bloomed in perfect harmony. Despite the season, golden birds nested freely among the branches. Small streams carried crystal clear water beneath elegant wooden bridges. It felt less like a garden and more like another world. "You care for all this alone?" Elena asked. Adrian smiled faintly. "It helps me remember." "Remember what?" He paused. "My family." His answer carried more sadness than words. Elena did not ask another question. She understood grief too well. As they walked deeper into the garden, Elena noticed something unusual. Many flowers were beginning to wilt. Their leaves had turned pale. Despite rich soil, she knelt beside one of the flower beds. "These roses are thirsty," Adrian frowned. "Impossible. The irrigation channels reach every corner." Elena gently brushed the soil aside with her fingers. "The surface is wet." She dug a little deeper. But beneath, the earth had become hard like stone. "The roots cannot breathe." Adrian watched her carefully. None of the estate's professional gardeners had noticed, yet this village florist discovered the problem within moments. "You understand plants. My mother taught me." She must have been remarkable. Elena smiled. She believed flowers listen better than people. For the first time in many years, Adrian laughed. It was quiet, unexpected, but genuine. Over the following hour, Elena explained how compacted soil slowly weakened even the healthiest plants. She suggested loosening the earth, adding compost and redirecting small water channels. Adrian listened with complete attention, not because she was speaking confidently, but because she spoke with kindness. She treated every flower as though it mattered. Every leaf, every root, every blossom. It reminded him of someone he had lost long ago. As the afternoon sun broke through the clouds, they reached the oldest tree in the garden. Its enormous branches stretched across the sky. Its trunk was wrapped with hundreds of silk ribbons. Elena noticed each ribbon carried a handwritten name. "What is this?" Adrian rested his hand against the ancient bark. "My mother planted this tree." He looked upward. Whenever someone in the village performed an act of true kindness, she tied a ribbon with their name, Elena. Slowly read a few. A baker, a blacksmith, a teacher, a shepherd. None were nobles, none were wealthy, they weren't famous. No, they simply chose kindness. Adrian smiled. My mother believed. Kingdoms survive because ordinary people do extraordinary things. Elena felt tears gathering in her eyes. My mother used to say something similar. What did she say? She believed flowers bloom for everyone equally. Adrian nodded. Wise woman. As evening approached, thunder rolled across the hills. The servants hurried toward the garden entrance. Your Grace! The head steward bowed urgently. A carriage has arrived. Adrian sighed. I suppose. Peace never lasts. The steward lowered his voice. Lord Victor is here. The warmth disappeared from Adrian's face. I'll come. Before leaving, he turned toward Elena. Would you return tomorrow? She looked surprised. You would allow that? I would ask it. She smiled gently. If I can help save the garden, I'll come. The next morning, Elena returned carrying only a basket of simple gardening tools. The servants greeted her very differently. Instead of suspicion, they offered respectful smiles. Word had spread quickly. The mysterious stranger who entered the forbidden garden had not brought disaster. She had brought hope. Inside, Adrian was already working. Without royal clothing, without guards, simply wearing old gardening gloves while clearing weeds. Elena couldn't help smiling. I never imagined a duke doing this himself, he shrugged. Soil doesn't care about titles, she laughed. That's true. They spent hours working side by side, loosening flower beds, pruning damaged branches, planting fresh herbs that naturally protected nearby roses. Neither noticed how quickly time passed. Conversation came easily, comfortably. Neither tried to impress the other. Instead, they simply shared stories. Adrian spoke of traveling with his parents as a child. Elena shared memories of selling flowers beside her mother's tiny cottage. Both realized they had lost the people they loved far too early. Grief had shaped them differently, but compassion had kept them moving forward. Late that afternoon, Elena discovered an abandoned greenhouse hidden behind climbing ivy. Most of its glass roof had shattered years before. Inside were hundreds of empty clay pots, broken shelves, forgotten seeds. She looked around in amazement. This place could become beautiful again. Adrian stood quietly beside her. My mother dreamed of teaching village children to grow plants here. What happened? He looked toward the broken ceiling. After she died, I locked the doors. I couldn't bear returning. Elena understood immediately. Sometimes pain didn't destroy memories. It simply convinced people never to revisit them. She gently picked up one dusty flower pot. It isn't too late. Adrian looked at her. For what? To finish her dream. For several moments, he said nothing. Then, almost in a whisper, I had forgotten dreams could survive grief. At that very moment, neither Elena nor Adrian noticed a figure watching them from the distant hedge. Lord Victor, his cold eyes narrowed as he observed them restoring the forgotten greenhouse together. He had spent years trying to convince Adrian to sell the garden and replace it with profitable buildings. Now, a simple village gardener was changing the Duke's mind. Victor quietly clenched his fists. If she keeps inspiring him, he muttered to himself, Everything I've planned will fall apart. And with that thought, he turned away, already preparing a scheme that would test not only Elena's courage, but also the Duke's trust. The following morning, sunlight poured across the estate, casting a warm glow over the greenhouse. Elena arrived before sunrise, carrying a basket filled with young herbs, flower seeds, and a notebook that had once belonged to her mother. Inside, its worn pages were handwritten lessons about soil, seasons, and patience. As she stepped into the greenhouse, she found Adrian already repairing one of the broken wooden benches. "You started without me," she said with a smile. He looked up, brushing dust from his hands. "I thought a gardener should arrive to a place ready for planting." Elena laughed softly. "And I thought dukes preferred giving orders." "I've discovered that gardens ignore orders," Adrian replied. "They only respond to care." Together they worked through the morning. They cleared broken glass, repaired cracked flower beds, and planted rows of lavender, rosemary, daisies, and wildflowers. Little by little, the forgotten greenhouse began to resemble the dream Adrian's mother had once imagined. Several estate workers paused to watch. One elderly groundskeeper smiled. "I haven't seen His Grace smile this often since he was a boy." The word spread quietly through the estate. People who had feared the Duke for years slowly realized something surprising. He had never been cruel. He had simply been lonely. A week later, Elena suggested opening the greenhouse to children from nearby villages. "They should learn that growing something takes patience," she said, "and hope." Adrian looked around the restored building. "My mother would have loved that. Then let her dream continue." He nodded. "We'll begin this Saturday." News traveled quickly. Families who had never been invited onto the estate received handwritten invitations instead of formal notices. Some were nervous, others were excited. Many wondered why the Duke had suddenly become interested in the villagers. Only Elena knew the answer. The garden had not changed Adrian. It had reminded him of the man he had once wanted to become. Meanwhile, Lord Victor watched everything with growing frustration. His plans depended on convincing Adrian that maintaining the enormous garden was too expensive. If the Duke abandoned it, Victor could persuade him to sell part of the land for luxury estates. The profits would be enormous. Now, villagers were visiting. The greenhouse was reopening. The estate had become full of life again. Victor realized he needed another strategy. "If I cannot destroy the garden," he whispered to himself, "I'll destroy the trust between them." 2 days before the children's first visit, disaster struck. Several rare white roses near the marble fountain had withered overnight. Their leaves had turned black. The stems bent lifelessly toward the ground. Servants gathered in shock. Those flowers had survived for decades. Adrian immediately knelt beside them. "What happened?" The head gardener examined the soil. "It appears someone poured a harmful mixture into the roots." Everyone looked at one another. Only a handful of people had access to the garden. Then one servant hesitated. I saw Miss Elena working here yesterday evening." The words hung heavily in the air. Silence followed. Several servants exchanged worried glances. Adrian stood slowly. "Bring Elena." When Elena arrived, she immediately noticed the damaged roses. Her face fell. "What happened?" The head gardener folded his arms. "You tell us." She looked confused. "I don't understand." "You were the last person near these flower beds." Elena shook her head. "I planted herbs nearby, but I would never harm a flower." Another servant stepped forward. "I saw you carrying a bottle." Elena nodded. "Yes. It contained natural plant nutrients." The gardener frowned. "We found this." He held up an empty glass bottle. It smelled strongly of chemicals. Elena looked at it in disbelief. "That isn't mine," the servants murmured among themselves. For the first time since entering the estate, people questioned her honesty. Adrian remained silent, not because he believed she was guilty, But because he wanted the truth, he looked directly at Elena. "Did you damage these roses?" She met his eyes without hesitation. "No. I would rather lose every job I've ever had than intentionally destroy a single flower." Her voice never wavered. Adrian believed her, not because of evidence, because throughout every day they had worked together, she had shown the same quiet respect for every living thing. A person who protected tiny seedlings would never poison ancient roses. "I trust her," he said firmly. The whispers stopped. The head gardener looked surprised. "But, Your Grace." "I said I trust her." Lord Victor, watching from a nearby balcony, hid his disappointment. His first attempt had failed. That evening, Elena refused to leave. "If someone harmed the roses," she said, "they may try again." Adrian agreed. Together, they inspected every path, every fountain, every flower bed. As darkness settled across the estate, lanterns glowed among the trees. Near midnight, Elena noticed something unusual. Fresh footprints, not leading into the garden, but out of it. "They're larger than yours," she whispered, "and larger than mine." The tracks disappeared behind the greenhouse. There, hidden beneath stacked firewood, Elena discovered another bottle identical to the first. Its cork still smelled of chemicals. Adrian carefully examined it. This proved someone planned everything. Before they could investigate further, they heard hurried footsteps. A young stable boy came running toward them. "Your Grace!" "What is it?" "I saw someone leaving through the eastern gate." "Who?" "I couldn't see his face. But he wore a ring with a black stone." Adrian's expression darkened. Only one member of the estate always wore a black stone signet ring. Lord Victor. The following morning, Adrian confronted Victor privately. Victor laughed confidently. "You're accusing me because of a ring? I'm asking questions." "You've become careless, Adrian." Victor smiled coldly. "Ever since that village girl appeared. You've forgotten who deserves your trust." Adrian answered quietly. "Trust is earned." Victor's smile disappeared. So is power. Without another word, he walked away. Adrian watched him leave, knowing one thing for certain. The greatest danger to the estate had never been hidden inside the forbidden garden. It had been hiding in plain sight all along. That Saturday, despite everything that had happened, the greenhouse opened its doors. Children filled the pathways with laughter. Some planted their very first flower. Others carefully watered tiny seedlings. Parents smiled as they watched. The once silent estate echoed with happiness. An elderly woman approached Elena with tears in her eyes. "My grandson hasn't smiled since his father passed away." She pointed toward a little boy proudly holding a small sunflower. Today he smiled again. Elena looked across the greenhouse. Adrian was kneeling beside the boy, patiently teaching him how to protect young roots while planting. For a moment, neither titles nor wealth mattered. There was only kindness being passed from one generation to another. Elena realized something important. The forbidden garden had never been forbidden because it was dangerous. It had been closed because grief had locked its gates. Now those gates stood open, not just to visitors, but to hope itself. Yet beyond the estate walls, Lord Victor climbed into his carriage with quiet determination. His failed schemes had only strengthened Elena and Adrian's friendship. Next time, he vowed, he would not attack the garden. He would attack the truth hidden within Adrian's family history. And that secret had the power to change both their lives forever. The laughter of children still echoed through the greenhouse long after the visitors had returned home. Tiny flower pots lined the wooden shelves, each marked with a child's name and the date they had planted their first seed. The forgotten greenhouse, once filled with silence and dust, had become a place of hope. Elena stood near the doorway, watching the evening sun paint the glass walls with shades of gold. "It finally feels alive," she whispered. Adrian smiled. It reminds me of the stories my mother used to tell. What kind of stories? She believed every person is like a seed. Some bloom quickly, while others need time, kindness, and faith before they discover who they can become. Elena looked around at the young plants. I think she was right. Over the following weeks, more families visited the estate than ever before. Farmers shared gardening tips with noble guests. Children laughed together without caring who was rich or poor. The garden had become a place where people met as neighbors instead of strangers. News of the Duke's kindness spread across the region. Many who had once believed Adrian was distant now discovered a different truth. He had never closed his heart. He had only hidden it behind grief. Not everyone welcomed these changes, Lord. Victor watched with growing frustration. His influence over the estate was fading. The Duke no longer relied on his advice. Estate workers respected Elena. Villagers trusted Adrian. Victor knew that if he wanted control again, he needed something stronger than rumors. He needed a secret. Late one evening, Victor entered the oldest wing of the manor where dusty records from generations past were stored. He searched through shelves of journals, letters, and family documents until he discovered a small wooden box tied with a faded blue ribbon. Side lay several handwritten letters from Adrian's late mother. Victor smiled coldly. So this is what you've hidden. He carefully slipped one letter into his coat before quietly leaving the room. The next morning, Adrian found Elena planting fresh roses near the marble fountain. You always choose the flowers that need the most care. She smiled. They usually become the strongest. Before Adrian could reply, the head steward hurried toward them. Your Grace, there is a problem. What happened? A letter has appeared in the village square. Adrian frowned. What letter? The steward looked uneasy. One written by your mother. Within the hour, villagers gathered around the notice board. The letter had been copied and displayed where everyone could read it. It spoke of the Duke's mother dreaming of opening the estate to every family, regardless of wealth or social standing. Most people smiled as they read her words, but Victor had removed one important page. Without it, the letter appeared unfinished. Rumors quickly spread that Adrian had ignored his mother's final wish for many years. Some questioned why the gates had remained closed. Others wondered whether the Duke had cared more about tradition than compassion. Adrian remained calm. I know this letter is incomplete. Elena looked at him. How? My mother never wrote without finishing her thoughts. There is another page. Together they returned to the manor. Archives, boxes filled every shelf. Dust floated. Through the sunlight, hours passed as they searched carefully. Finally, Elena noticed a faint mark inside the wooden box. One letter was missing. The Y ribbon isn't worn evenly, she observed. There were originally more pages. Adrian nodded slowly. Someone took it. That evening, an elderly housekeeper approached Elena privately. I may have seen something. What is it? Several nights ago, Lord Victor left the archive room carrying documents. Why didn't you tell anyone? I wasn't certain they belonged there. Elena thanked her. They finally had a clue. Rather than accusing Victor without proof, Adrian chose patience. My mother always said that truth doesn't fear time, so we'll let the truth reveal itself. Elena agreed. If we act with anger, we'll become exactly what he expects. Instead, they quietly searched every office and storage room Victor regularly used. For 2 days, they found nothing. Then, while helping organize old gardening tools in a neglected storage shed, Elena noticed a loose floorboard. Beneath it rested a small iron box. Inside were estate papers, financial records, and the missing letter. Adrian unfolded it carefully. His hands trembled. The final page completed his mother's message. It read, If one day grief convinces you to close these gates, remember this. Love grows only when it is shared. Open the garden again when your heart is ready, not because others demand it, But because kindness is always stronger than fear, Adrian quietly lowered the. For years he had blamed himself for locking the garden. Now he understood. His mother had never condemned him. She had believed he would heal in time. Tears filled his eyes. Elena placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. You honored her today? No, Adrian answered softly. We honored her together. The following morning, Adrian invited every villager to the estate. Standing beneath the ancient ribbon tree, he read his mother's complete letter aloud. The missing page changed. Everything, people realized the rumors, had been built upon an incomplete story. No one had been betrayed. A grieving son had simply needed time before fulfilling his mother's dream. Lord Victor, standing near the crowd, realized his plan had failed once again. But this time, he had been witnessed taking the documents by the elderly housekeeper, who bravely stepped forward before everyone. I saw him remove the letter. The crowd fell silent. Victor tried to deny it, but the recovered documents, together with the housekeeper's testimony, revealed the truth. Adrian looked at Victor with sadness rather than anger. You could have helped this estate flourish. Instead, you chose deception. Victor lowered his head. For the first time, he had no excuses. The estate council removed him from his position, ending his influence over Ashcroft Manor. As Victor walked away through the open gates, he glanced back at the flourishing garden. He had spent years trying to possess what could only be protected through kindness, and that was a lesson he understood far too late. The days that followed felt different across Ashcroft Estate. There was no fear in the gardens anymore. The gates that had once remained locked from sunrise to sunset now stood open every morning, welcoming visitors from nearby villages. Children hurried toward the greenhouse with watering cans in their hands. Elderly gardeners shared stories beneath the ancient oak trees. Families spread blankets across the green lawns, enjoying peaceful afternoons surrounded by flowers that had once been hidden from the world. For the first time in many years, the estate was filled not with whispers of mystery, but with laughter. Adrian often walked through the garden without announcing himself. He enjoyed watching people discover the beauty his mother had loved so deeply. One afternoon, he noticed a young girl kneeling beside a wilted sunflower. Tears filled her eyes as she tried to lift its drooping stem. I think I ruined it, she whispered. Elena knelt beside her. No, you didn't. The little girl looked up hopefully, but it looks so weak. Elena gently loosened the soil around the roots. Sometimes, a flower isn't dying. It's simply asking for a little more care. Together they added fresh soil, watered the plant, and placed a small wooden support beside its stem. Will it bloom again? The child asked. Elena smiled. If we don't give up on it, there's every chance. Adrian watched the moment quietly. He realized Elena had never been speaking only about flowers. She was speaking about people. As summer arrived, the greenhouse became a community school where anyone could learn to grow vegetables, herbs, and flowers. Farmers exchanged ideas with experienced gardeners, and children proudly returned each week to measure the growth of the plants they had started themselves. The project soon became known throughout the region as the Garden of New Beginnings. Visitors didn't come simply to admire rare flowers. They came to learn that hope could be cultivated with patience, kindness, and shared effort. One morning, a traveling teacher visited the estate after hearing about the garden. I've visited many noble homes, he told Adrian, but I've never seen one where everyone is treated like family. Adrian smiled. That is because this garden belongs to everyone who helps it grow, the teacher nodded, thoughtfully. Then your mother's dream has truly come alive. Months later, the ancient ribbon tree welcomed hundreds of new ribbons. Each one carried the name of someone who had shown compassion: blacksmith who repaired tools for struggling, farmers without charging them, widow who baked bread for lonely neighbors, group of children who spent their weekends planting trees along dusty village roads. No act of kindness was considered too small. Elena tied each ribbon carefully, remembering the lesson Adrian's mother had left behind. Great lives, she often told the children, are built from small acts repeated every day. One peaceful evening, Adrian and Elena sat beside the marble fountain where they had first met. The water sparkled beneath the setting sun. It feels strange, Adrian admitted. What does? I spent years believing the garden protected me from... He looked around at the blooming roses, but opening it healed the pain instead. Elena smiled. Sometimes, the walls we build to protect ourselves also keep out the people who can help us. Heal. Adrian nodded slowly. You change this place. Elena gently shook her head. No. The garden changed because you chose to open the gate. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't empty. It was peaceful. Finally, Adrian reached into his pocket and unfolded the faded silver scarf Elena had nearly lost on that rainy morning. Had it carefully restored, he said. He handed it back to her. It reminds me that one small moment can change an entire life. Elena held the scarf with grateful eyes. If the wind hadn't carried it over the fence, I never would have entered, and I never would have met the Duke who preferred being called a gardener. Both of them laughed. Years passed. The Forbidden Garden slowly became known by a new name. The Garden of Hope. People traveled from distant towns to visit not because of rare flowers or grand fountains, but because every path carried a story. A story about forgiveness replacing bitterness, about courage overcoming fear, about kindness transforming grief into purpose. The greenhouse educated thousands of children. Many grew into skilled gardeners, teachers, and community leaders who carried the same lessons into their own towns. The ribbon tree became so full that new branches had to be supported with wooden beams. Every ribbon represented someone who had chosen compassion over selfishness. Every bloom reminded visitors that beauty grows where people care for one another. One spring morning, an elderly Elena walked slowly through the garden with a group of young students. One curious boy asked, "Is it true this place used to be forbidden?" She smiled. Yes. Why? Because people believed fear was stronger than hope. The boy looked around at the colorful flowers. Laughing children and families working together. They were wrong. Elena nodded. They were. She pointed toward the open gates standing wide beneath the morning sunlight. The strongest gates are not the ones that keep people out. They're the ones we choose to open. The children looked toward the entrance where new visitors were arriving with smiles and curious eyes. Without another word, they hurried forward to welcome them. Elena watched proudly. The lesson no longer belonged only to her or Adrian. It had become part of every heart that entered the garden. And that, she realized, was the greatest harvest of all.